with a video going through all of my unread books on my shelf. I'm hesitant to call this a TBR because, first off, I never make a TBR. Second of all, I don't know when I'm going to read these books. So it's not like a TBR for now, because I think the book that's been on my shelf the longest has been on there at least 15 years, and it's unread. So I'm not going to give myself a goal of reading it this year or next year because I haven't read it in 15 years, but I still want to keep it. So all of my unread books, not a TBR, and there's a total of 42 books on this list, I think. Don't count them. But I'm going to go through each one. Some of them, there's like a little tidbit of why I'm keeping it, where I got it, why I wanted to read it. And some of them aren't as special or memorable, so they won't really have a story with them. Probably good for you guys, so that I'm not making a 45-minute video of why I haven't read these books. The list is going to start with David Bowie and bookend with something also David Bowie related. If there's anything in these piles of books that you've read and you think that I should prioritize this year, let me know down in the comments, and maybe I'll get to it. So first is David Bowie's Starman by Paul Trinka. This is a biography on Bowie, and I bought it, I think it was shortly after he had passed away is when this was published. So I've had it on my shelf for a long time. So I've had this on my shelf since 2011. It's been 10 years and I haven't read it. I'm not a big person for biographies. That might be part of it. Or I think it was just hitting too close to home when it was soon after Bowie passed away. But now that it's been 10 years, I might as well try to get into it. Next up are two nonfiction pieces about Neil Gaiman, one written by him, A View from the Cheap Seats, and one written by Hank Wagner, Christopher Golden, and Stephen Bissette. This is Prince of Stories. This one is a chronology of a lot of his work, I think snippets of interviews of him, and some photographs of him. A View from the Cheap Seats is his take on art, literature, comics, myths, dreams, just a lot of his insights and his thoughts on a myriad of topics. With these two, I'm hoping to get more insight on how Neil Gaiman thinks and maybe find some works of his that I'm not familiar with to keep adding to my collection. While we're on Neil Gaiman, next on my unread list is Norse Mythology by him. I picked this up because I want everything written by Gaiman, but I could not get into it. I tried listening to the audiobook and reading along, but I have zero knowledge of Norse mythology, so it just couldn't really grasp my attention the way that I would have liked it to. Still, speaking of Gaiman, we have Blood in the Mist by Hope Mirrlees. I picked this up at a discount bookstore because on the back it says, the book that New York Times bestselling author Neil Gaiman considers one of the finest fantasy novels in the English language. So I was pretty interested in this. Even the cover had intrigued me. I just like that it's kind of cartoonish. So this is one that I should have read a while ago. Still haven't stuck with it. In my newbie tag, I had said that I like retellings of known stories. So I have 3 here that are retellings of The Wizard of Oz. First, we have A Lion Among Men by Gregory Maguire. I read the first 2 books in this series, Wicked and Son of a Witch, and I think I picked this up when I was in LPN school. And that was kind of a rigorous program. And I was trying to use reading as an escape if I was reading at all. And this just started out with a lot of political unrest in Oz, and it just did not hold my attention the way that it should have. And I do want to read this, but I feel like I'll have to reread the series in order to get into this one. Next, I have Finding Dorothy by Elizabeth Letts. It appears to be like a historical fiction. It takes place in Hollywood in the 1930s, and the wife of Frank L. Baum is trying to get behind the scenes of them filming The Wizard of Oz. And she hears Judy Garland singing and realizes that she's under a lot of pressure, so she wants to protect Judy the way she tried so hard to protect the real Dorothy. So that sounded very intriguing. And the last of the Oz retellings is Dorothy Must Die by Danielle Page. This, I think, is the first of maybe 4 books. I only bought the first one. I'm not a huge fan of series, and I wanted to make sure that I enjoyed this before buying the rest. But the back of this book says, "My name is Amy Gum, and I'm the other girl from Kansas. I've been recruited by the Revolutionary Order of the Wicked, and I've been given a mission. Remove the Tin Woodman's heart, steal the Scarecrow's brain, take the lion's courage, and then Dorothy must die." So, this seems like something other people would have read. Tell me what you think of it. Next are some Terry Pratchett novels. I have the second and third in the Discworld series in chronological order, the second and third. That would be The Light Fantastic and Equal Rights. I'm currently reading The Color of Magic, and I bought these quite a long time ago at Walden's Books when it was still in the mall. I've read The Color of Magic once. I'm rereading it now with a friend, and I hope to continue the series. So maybe I'll get to these sooner rather than later. The next novel I bought at Dollar General. I saw the name Terry Pratchett, and I was like, $3? Let me buy that. It's called Making Money. I don't even know what it's about, but I think it takes place in the main city of Discworld, or the city that I'm reading about in The Color of Magic. So it's within that world, and it was only $3. And last of Terry Pratchett, I have A Blink of the Screen, and it is a short story collection. I bought this knowing that I wanted to read more Pratchett, but I didn't want to get sucked into a series, so I thought short stories would be a good way to take bite-sized pieces of his work, but I've still never read it. The next 2 novels are special to me because they were recommended to me by residents that I had worked with when I worked in a nursing home back in Pennsylvania. The first one is Breathing Lessons by Ann Tyler. This one I've had on my shelf for I think 10 or 11 years. And I was working in the kitchen of this nursing home when I was in high school. And I had a really close connection with a resident. And me and him were talking about books. And he said this one was one of his favorites, and he gave it to me. So I've had it ever since. But it has like a romantic element. It's a couple that's been married. When I was in high school, I just didn't relate to that, so I never read it. And going back through my shelves, every time I've moved, I've always kept it, but I've never really thought to try to pick it up. But I was reading the back, and the last line says, "But on the road to a friend's funeral, they make some unexpected detours and discover how extraordinary their ordinary lives really are." So that seems like something that I'd want to read now, and something that I can relate to at this point in my life. So this might be a priority. Next up is another book that I had talked to a resident about, At this point, I was an LPN already, and me and one of the residents were talking about books. And I had recently, I think, picked up a few books from, I think, a thrift store, like Goodwill. And I had asked her what her favorite book was, and she said The Thornbirds by Colleen McCullough. And it was so coincidental. I had just picked up this book from Goodwill, and then I had asked her that question. I believe it follows a family through a few generations, and the beginning of the family starts out on a sheep farm in Australia, and it kind of follows them and their lives and the generations after that. And I think it's something that I would be more interested to read at this point in my life as well. Next up, I have the novelization of Jumanji. I also bought that at the discount bookstore. Just this little gray box makes me laugh. It says it's a novelization based on a screenplay, based on a screen story, based on the book by Chris Van Allsburg. So that's hilarious. I think when I bought this, I thought I was buying the actual book, but I just haven't got rid of it. It has Rob Williams' face on it, and I loved Jumanji as a kid. It even has like pictures from the movie in it. So I don't know if I'll ever read it, but I know that I won't unhaul it. A Shilling for Candles by Josephine Tay. This is the book that's been on my shelves for the longest that I haven't read. I bought this book while I was on vacation with my family, and we were camping, and they have like a general camp store, and there's always this little spinning shelf with books on it, and I picked this up, and it's a mystery novel, and I don't think I was ever really into mysteries. I'm still not super into mysteries. I've had it for so long. I do want to get into it, and maybe this year is the year. Maybe it's not. Maybe it'll live on my shelf for another 15 years. Who knows? I bet nobody's read this book. All right, just a small stack left of books that have meaning behind them. One of those is Between the Bridge and the River by Craig Ferguson. I bought this, I don't know where, but it is Craig Ferguson's debut novel. I don't know if he's written anything after this, but I loved his late night talk show. I think he's very funny. I love his accent, and I'm sure this book is hopefully funny. I've just never had a reason to read it, but I can't get rid of it. And then I have A Spark of Light by Jodi Picoult. My mother-in-law visited for Thanksgiving, and she had just finished this book, so she left it here for us to read. And I think it's centered around an abortion clinic that is being held hostage. I've read a few Jodi Picoults. She's not my favorite author, but I think I'll give this one a try. Next, I have 18th and Castro by Karen Callmaker. This book I bought when I was like 17 or 18, and there was no real representation of lesbians in the media that I could see, and none of the books that I had read had lesbian romance in them. So I bought this, and I think some of the stories are pretty erotic, but I bought it and I hid it from my mother, and then when I was living at home, I never read it. I didn't want anybody to ask me what I was reading. But now that I'm an adult, I'm sure I can read this without being embarrassed. It's pretty short, so I should probably read it and decide if I want to keep it on my shelf. And then I have Between the Acts by Virginia Woolf. I picked this up off of my 11th grade English teacher's bookshelf just to have something to read in my free time during classes and things. And I ended up stealing it, and I never gave it back. I could have given it back in 12th grade, but I just wanted to keep it. So it's stolen. And I feel guilty, but I like to have it on my shelf. Next, I have two versions of A Midsummer's Night Dream by, I'm looking like I don't know it's by William Shakespeare. By William Shakespeare. One is just the play, and then this one is the play with some modernized text in it, just because I was afraid that I wouldn't understand what was happening if I couldn't figure out what any of the words meant. So I bought this version because I was scared. But I've always wanted to read A Midsummer's Night Dream because I remember watching a movie with my best friend. I think we were in like 9th grade. There was a movie on Netflix called Were the World Mine? And it was like this gay romance that was happening in like this all-boys school. And I think the students were putting on a version of A Midsummer's Night Dream. So that had always like sparked my interest in this play. And I should read it. The next two are two books that one of my good friends had sent me, I think the year before last. I haven't got around to them. The Island of the Blue Dolphins by Scott Odell and On Basilisk Station by David Weber. Island of the Blue Dolphins was one of his favorite books, and he thought I'd enjoy this sci-fi. And now I can quickly go through the remainder of my stack because they're on my shelf for some reason, but they're not as meaningful as the others, I guess. 2 years, 8 months, and 28 days by 28 nights by Salman Rushdie. I've heard the name Salman Rushdie. I've never read anything else by him. I picked this up once and put it down. And let me know if you read it so I can make a decision if I should read it or just unhaul it. Then I have The Cracker Factory by Joyce Roberta Burdett. It has no cover. I bought this used at a thrift store and the cover was all mangled, and then at one point it just came off during all of my many moves. I have Titus Grown by Mervyn Peake. This is book 1 of a trilogy. The cover was very intriguing to me. It looked like an old fantasy. And I've had plans to read it, but it felt kind of dry at the beginning. All of you fantasy booktubers, let me know if I should get into this sooner rather than later. I have Hector and the Secrets of Love by Francois Laylord. I bought this because I watched Hector and the Search for Happiness, and I thought this might be good. I have The Flower Children by Maxine Swan. This, I just know, I think the setting is Pennsylvania in the 1970s. I think it's like a young family on a farm. So that setting sounded intriguing to me because I wish I was a child of the 70s. Really a child of the 60s, so I could be a child in the 70s and a teen in the 80s, but it's not how things worked out. Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil by John Berend. The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera. The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. I do like historical fiction. I've wanted to pick this up, but it's just thick and intimidating for a book that I'm afraid I might not love. The Night Strangers by Chris Bokjalian. I picked this up once and it started out with a plane crash, and I'm terrified of flying on planes. I've only done it once because my mother-in-law made me in order to get to Mexico. But the plane in the novel was crashing and I just could not get past that part. I think it's like supernatural. I have a science fiction I picked up because the main character is a female. That is Aurora by Kim Stanley Robinson. Next I have The Last Days of Magic by Mark Tompkins. This, I think, is magical realism, maybe. Maybe just fantasy. But it's set in Ireland, and I have a love for Ireland, so I was intrigued by this. I said that I would bookend this video with other David Bowie related books, and those are books about the labyrinth, my favorite thing. So these 4 are a manga set called Return to the Labyrinth by Jake T. Forbes and Chris Lai. And my ex-girlfriend had bought all these for me. I read the first one, but I think I was afraid I wanted to like savor them, so I never finished them and they just hide out on my shelf. But manga is pretty quick to go through, so I should just read them. And last, I have the novelization of The Labyrinth by A.C.H. Smith and Brian Froud. I've wanted this book for so long. So when I was in 11th grade, I had found out that there was a novelization of The Labyrinth, and I wanted it. But I saw it on eBay, and it was like a couple $100. So then I had looked for it online, and there was a website called like The Crazy Lady in the Attic, and somehow they had typed out a whole PDF of the novel. And at the time, I did not have a printer at home, so I had study hall in my 11th grade English teacher, the one that I stole that other book from. I had study hall in his classroom, and I had told him about the Labyrinth book and how I couldn't buy it, and I wanted to print it out, and we went back and forth about me printing it out in class, and eventually he agreed. So it just took so long. I don't think I printed out the whole thing. I had maybe 100 pages printed out over a couple days and just gave up. I have it in a binder somewhere, but then I saw this at Barnes & Noble, I believe, and this one's really nice because it has like Jim Henson's notebook pages in the back about different ideas for the labyrinth, like a name list. And I think I started to read this when I first got it, but I'm so, like, the dialogue and the script from The Labyrinth is, like, burned into my brain. So any little thing, like any piece of dialogue that was off, like, that's not what David Bowie said. How can I read this book and it's not even The Labyrinth? But I think I just need to get over it and enjoy it for what it is. And that's it. Let me know if you've read anything on this list, and tell me if I should prioritize anything, or I don't know if there's anything besides Jumanji that I can unhaul, but tell me if something's not worth my time. Thanks for watching, you guys. And if you like this video, please push the like button, subscribe for more chaos, and I'll see you next time. When I was taking the thumbnail for this video, oh my god, I think I was holding like 15 to 20 pounds of books, and I'm a weak bitch. And I'm like holding them up, and my camera was facing the other way, so I couldn't see what was happening. So I had to do it like 10 times, so I've had my workout for the day, that's for sure.